So being invited at 13 to a meeting, and it wasn't a meeting officially, he said, I'm going to a think tank. Well, can you imagine telling that to a 13-year-old? I'm going to a think tank? I'm like, what the heck is a think tank?
Yeah.
Okay. He said, you gotta come with me. So I said, okay. So I went, and there was a group of people who I assume now are or were Yukon Liberals. And a number of Aboriginal leaders, like First Nations leaders, that were there, and they were talking about this white paper policy, which I knew nothing about, and they were talking about how to combat it from a Yukon perspective and how to influence change from a Yukon perspective, right? And again, that perspective is not my word back then, it's my word now. So I listened to that, and I'm just like bored out of my tree, like, oh, okay, these guys are doing what is a policy, what is an act? But I had to listen, so I'm there. So I went to a number of those by the time I was 16. I was working at Skookum Friendship Center in a student youth program with children, and then I was also brought in to Yukon Native Brotherhood to work part-time, and that was by Elijah again, just to work part-time with him doing stuff, right? So then I started to get introduced to processes of, meeting the chiefs. Oh yeah, this is cool, these, young, beautiful Aboriginal women working in these offices, and what are they doing? So by the time I was 16, I was getting pretty much brought up to speed on there's politics in the world.
Right.
But I was still politicking for the Conservative Party. I was still
Really?
Yes. My sister and her friends were a part of the Young Conservatives. It was called the Young Conservatives of Canada. And so in the Yukon there was a Conservative Party, and they were running an election for Eric Nielsen, and of course I knew Eric Nielsen because he knew my parents, right? So
Who are your parents again?
Patty and Stella Jim. So he knew my parents, so I knew him, like he was, I've met him many times, so anyway, so it didn't surprise me that my sister was working with the Young Conservative Party of Canada, and they were campaigning for, or not campaigning, but putting up campaign photos and handing out pamphlets for Eric Nielsen.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had all these campaign pictures. We were putting them all over the town, and all, like in the village, like the old village down there. We were putting them up everywhere. And I remember putting them up, like putting it on the door, and Uncle Elijah saying, "What the hell is this?" Ripping it off, and I was just shocked. What are you doing? So I said, "Oh, we're putting up posters for." I was just proud of myself that I was a part of this group that was supporting somebody, right? I was getting politically involved. He's like, "Haven't you learned anything from?" It's like, what was I supposed to learn? I'm sorry. These were politically liberal side thinking people that I had been meeting with over a few years with him, right?
Yeah.
Little did I know. I mean, they didn't wear liberal banners or I had no idea. So yeah, that was my first lesson in party politics. I was shocked. So needless to say, I had to quit the Young Conservative Party Canada kind of campaign. I was like, oh, okay, I can't do that anymore. And I remember telling my sister that too. I said, Uncle doesn't want us doing that. Oh, it's okay, she said. God, back then. So that's what we did. That was like, I had no idea what it was about. Absolutely none, but I was a part of something.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's what...
He really mentored you into that role, hey?
It's like, yeah, and that's essentially what we lose, right, in this environment where we just go, and we don't, like you say, groom our young people to be what they aspire to be, even if they don't know it, right? And I remember asking him one time, like, why am I here? And he said, because you talk lots. I was like, but I haven't said anything. I just sit here, at these little think tank meetings they had. And he just started laughing at me. He said, oh, no, it's okay. He said, you're going to learn something. That's why you're here, and you're going to take over at some point, And so, yeah, I ran for office when I was pregnant with Ian, 1978. No, I ran for office for the Indian Women's Association when I was with Ian, and I worked for CYFA, and then, so Indian Women's Association was volunteer. By the time Justin was 2 years old, I ran for office and won, got involved in politics. And again, I was a single parent. I was looking after my sick grandmother who had cancer, and then I was new in office. And I look back on it now, and it's like, what were you not thinking? It's like, was there not enough challenges in your life? You had to go and jump with both feet into this, quagmire of, but that's, again, it's that whole mentoring, you need to be there, you need to do this, it's your time to do this, and it wasn't much of a, for myself, it wasn't much of a forethought, it was just, it's not something that, like today we tell children, oh, you're very intelligent, you should become a lawyer, or you should become a doctor, or the Prime Minister of Canada, this is your forte. I didn't think that way, right? Mission school didn't groom you for that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, my world view was very small, other than reading Life magazine. I was always shocked about what the world was all about, reading Life magazine and mission school.
So you watched mission school? Did you go to
Carcross Residential School.
Chula?
And Yukon Hall.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but I didn't, I think the upside for me was I didn't go until I was about 7, almost 8, yeah, so I stayed home with my grandmother until then.
Your grandma?
Annie Ned.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was lucky in that sense that I think I had a pretty strong foundation, and I was pretty determined, and I wasn't one that you could easily push aside in mission school, so I was pretty brass, for a kid, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Really, when I look back on it, and on that whole experience, I there wasn't much, I don't know where that comes from. There wasn't much that really instilled a lot of fear in me. So it was almost like, yeah, okay, today you might beat the shit out of me. Of course that wasn't my language back then, but today you might beat me with a stick or a ruler, but tomorrow my grandma might show up. Or tomorrow or the next day I'm not going to be here. That kind of thinking was, so it was like meeting each day head on and not, I don't know where that came from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I do know that it's probably served me well to survive in those systems all those years. Really survived. Because I remember Grandma dropping me off and them saying, she was adamant about them not cutting my hair, right? So there's a whole story around why young women should have long hair, and why nobody should, especially men, and anybody else, should touch our hair. And it's directly related to our strength, our internal strength, our spiritual strength, our mental strength. And it's directly related to DNA, right? So they shouldn't touch young women's hair, much less a young man's hair. But they did anyways. And I remember my grandmother giving them heck, coming into the school, and I seen her for the first time. I had hair down here that was always braided, and they chopped it off. It was like just this little,
same little hairdo, right?
yeah,
Everyone had.
right up your neck and right below your ears, like just this block. And I remember her just touching my head and almost crying, and using her cane and just telling that guy with her cane, you said you weren't going to cut her hair. So I thought for a minute she was going to chase him around and hit him with her cane. But that's the contrast, right? So seeing her tenacity, I think seeing her determination in all of this, I think created that determination in me as a child to just keep on going. And then there was other people in the system by the time I was there too. By the time I was 8 or 9, we had a supervisor, Pearl Silas was a supervisor at Carcross Residential School, and she was the first First Nation supervisor. And Pearl was kind of like the mother figure for all the little girls.
Really?
Oh yeah, and it was just wonderful.
It's like
all
we're
of
just
them.
drawn to our own.
Everybody.
Yeah.
But because she had compassion and she had love and she probably saw or felt how we were treated. She probably was a mission school survivor herself, which I think she was. But she was a supervisor. She came back to that institution to be a supervisor, to take care of the little girls. And I always admired her for that, and I always told her that when she was, I had a chance to tell her that before she died, that I always appreciated that because she treated us like we mattered, you know? And all of us used to just like look forward to seeing her because she always had a hug for everybody, and she'd giggle at us, and, you know, little girl things that we did or whatever, and ask her or talk to her about. But she paid that extra bit of attention. Can you imagine how starved we were for that kind of attention? It was just horrible to think about it now. And so when she showed up and was able to do that with us, it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And we had her, I had a music teacher that was in grade 3 that even though we didn't have music classes, she wasn't a music teacher, but she played like the piano, so she was teaching me how to play piano and how to read music by the time I was in grade 3. So that was a form of escape, right? Even though we weren't allowed to learn that stuff, she still did it. And then we had a German gym teacher who just created this outdoor gym thing for the boys, which I challenged and said girls can do it and we can do it better. And so we got a group of girls together and we did it.
Oh.
And so, because that was his challenge, right? He said, okay, if you can prove to me that 5 or more girls can do this, then the girls can have this as part of their gym class. And so I remember getting, I think, Millie Johnson and Kathy Blanchard from Dawson. So Millie from Pelly, Kathy from Dawson, Beth Blanchard from Mayo. Probably Edith Smith from Quinlan. God, there was who else? Pauline Martin. Myself. There was 1 or 2 others that we got. I think Mary Smith was one of them, and Mary's one of the murdered and missing, one of them. Mary was one of them. Just said, okay, this is what we have to do. Got them all together, and I think Millie was the smallest one of us, but the bravest. She's like, oh yeah, we could do that. And what we had to do was we had to climb a tree. So part of that was climbing a tree. He had little bars on it, right? And honestly, like, I don't know measurements, but I would swear to God that thing was like 20 feet up.
Wow.
So we had to climb a tree. He had a rope that was tied from there, and it was secured to the ground. So you have to climb that tree. There's no harnesses to keep you from dropping. There's no safety harness, right? You got to remember this is in the 60s. And so you throw the rope around, and there's a loop in the rope. It's kind of like a noose, and you put your hands through that, and you hang onto the ropes, and you throw it over that rope, and you go, and it's secured to the ground, which is 20 feet up, so probably 20 feet out. And you go down, and you gotta land, and you gotta run.
Wow.
Fast when you land, right?
Yeah.
There's no practice. We just had to do, as young women,
Yeah. And prove that you can do it.
to prove that we could do it. I mean, some of us hit the ground, you know.
Yeah.
None of us dropped.
That's
None of us
good.
dropped, but we hit the ground down below and dragged a little bit. And then there was another one where there was a tightrope on the bottom and a tightrope on top. And the tightrope on top was just in case you're gonna fall. So you could keep your hands up here, and you had to walk that tightrope between 2 trees. And we did it. We did that. And there was like 2 or 3 other things that he did that he challenged us with. We did it all.
Good.
The girls did it all. And I said to him, wow, Mr. Hancock, I said, we did it all and we did it better. Well, he said, I don't know. I said, the only reason you don't know is because the boys have been doing this for a month or so and we just started, but we still did it better. I was determined. See, and that's the kind of tenacity, right? And I wasn't the only one. I mean, all the girls were chiming in saying, yes, we did it better. So we got that as a part of our gymnastics, you know? And he built boxes. He built boxes that we could do gymnastics, like tumbling and all of that stuff. So he was really good. I mean, I think that part of it was challenging the child to go to the next step, the next level.
And you led that.
No, not just myself. I think that core, and that was the thing, right? We had that core group of young girls, that support group that we established, all of us. And so we encouraged one another. We encouraged one another to speak out. We encouraged one another to challenge each other, to challenge ourselves, and to challenge the boys. Always challenge the boys. We almost burnt one of them at the stake. What were we not thinking then? So that's a part of it, right? Is that whole inner strength that we have, and I think all of us had it coming into the mission school stuff. All of us had it. We found it in each other, and we created that support group right from the get-go. And today, I'm in touch with just about all of those young women. And I call them young women. I mean, we're in our 60s now, but we're still all in touch with one another. I mean, you know, one of them can walk in the room and we're still friends. We talk like we just never left off. So and the sad part, I guess, is that I wish I had that relationship with some of my sisters, my biological sisters, which didn't happen because we were kept apart because of that mission school as well.
So it was by age and by gender?
By age and by gender. So they separated the boys from the girls, right? And the ages. So my younger sister would have been probably 4 years younger, so there's no way that she would have ever got into the group of girls that I was with. Mm-hmm. You know, no way. She was just too young, so they were kept separate. And then the younger ones, like my sister Darlene and Gary and Wayne, got sent to Lower Post. Mm. And then the older ones, like I think Nora was in Carcross for a year when I was there, so she didn't stay long, so then I was by myself, and she went to Baptist Mission School with Barb and Margaret, so they separated us as a family.
Very...
It's just so destructive, so destructive. I mean, they knew what they were doing. I'm sure they did. Because even my brother Benny was the only boy that was in Carcross, and then I never saw him because the boys and girls were kept separate, and he was younger than I was, so I was never in the spot where I could.
No, I see that with my dad's family too, like very, very distant from his sisters and.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's no, and that was the downside, right? I created this core group of connection with these women that, you know, we were in the group together. Which probably naturally would have happened with my siblings if we'd been kept together. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it didn't happen. Didn't happen that way. But it's like that whole thing now, you know, like if I go to Dawson, I know that they're all, like all of those young women they're very outspoken, they're very, you know, forward-thinking, moving, and protective of their rights. Like there's a sense there, right? That whole thing of, well, you removed me from my family, my culture, my heritage, my values and principles. You removed me from that, but it doesn't mean that I forgot about it. So here they are, and there's like Millie Johnson is a leader in her own right, in her community, and always has been and always will be, elected or non-elected, right? She'll always be an advocate for the rights. And so I see that in certain groups of people. And I wonder sometimes too, if it had to do with the principle of the day in mission school. Because some people say, well, how come you're different? You know, when they did that whole residential school documentary, somebody asked me that. I was so offended. How come you didn't end up on and this was one of our own, like the NADA, what was his name? Estrenko. Wade, not Wade. He was one of the interviewers.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, he phoned me up and said he wanted to talk to me, that NADA was doing this Mission School Syndrome documentary.
Yeah.
And would I be interested? And I said, you know what, you've piqued my interest, but how about coming by and sitting down with me and we can talk about what your questions are, right? Before I agreed to the interview. And so he came and we went through the questions, and I thought, well, yeah, I could handle that. And then he had one more question, and that was the question of, you know, how come you ended up being a leader as opposed to being somebody on the riverbank?
Mm.
And I was just like, excuse me?
Wow.
I was just like,
It is, like...
are you kidding me? Are you going to ask me that question on air? Like, where are you coming from with that kind of question?
So stigmatized, eh? Like, just...
I was flabbergasted. I refused at that point.
Good.
And then at the other end of it was, and he was like, oh, you know, and he said, the other part of the question that I might ask you during the interview is, you know, how did you become a leader? And he said, I did a little bit of research, and I found he found my education records. How did he get my education records?
Good question. How?
He said, you were pretty much an A student. I said, where did you find that? He said, the archives. I said, how did you get it? Which archives were you looking at to find out? He said, oh, maybe, he said, and then I see that you were very athletically inclined. Well, see, that was my group, right?
Mm-hmm. So all this stuff's public knowledge?
It's all public knowledge.
Wow.
Why? I mean, is
Exactly.
that for
Why?
non-First Nations? So I was deeply offended that our own organization would give the authority to somebody that was non-First Nation to go digging up my personal information, my personal history without my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And I said that to him, and I phoned a few people and said the same thing, and I refused to be videoed for that Mission School Syndrome project, even though I thought it was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Because of the way they questioned and the way they did their research, I was just like, ethically? We have been scrutinized by doctors, scientists, you name it, across the country, everywhere around the world, you know, except for ourselves. I mean, we don't, I wouldn't even think of doing that to somebody else without their knowledge and their permission to go into their background. I mean, that's something that our grandparents taught us about, you know, it's almost a doonlee. You don't touch somebody else's stuff, almost, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it takes it beyond that. You don't touch somebody else's stuff. You don't talk about other people. You don't do this. Those are doonlee laws. And I was a little offended by it. Actually, no, I was deeply offended by it. That's why I refused. So yeah, you know, and so as you go along, as I went along, I learned a lot, and I learned a lot politically as well, from just using, you know, little tools. Like the Indian Women's Association always had little leadership training workshops, you know, how to speak publicly, how to write a proposal, just little things like that helped, I think, me become more confident in becoming who I was as a human being, but also as a leader, which I didn't ever think myself as a leader, right? I never thought it in those terms.
Yeah.
but so committed to creating change. And so that's, and you know, having mentors, which a number of them I've challenged over the years as well. You know, I'm not beyond that. Sorry. Taught me well. So, yeah, it's not a thing of, and I, you know, I don't think I've ever had one leader that said, you know, just do as I do and, you know, do as I say and not as I, it's like I've never had one leader that says this is the right way. It's like, these are the tools and you know, create your own.
They kind of just guide you.
They guide you, and challenge you. I've had a lot of challenges in my leadership. So when I got elected as leader to CYI, it's not a story that I'm proud of, but it's not a story that shouldn't not be told. I was elected, the Indian Women's Association really backed me, and they backed me 100% because they thought that I would be able to help them create a position on the leadership that was strictly for women, right? And I agreed with them, totally. The one thing that I didn't consider before that agreement was the fact that we have traditional, women are matriarchs, right? We have traditional leadership skills, we have traditional leadership teachings, we have traditional leadership obligations. And so colonized politics and traditional leadership sometimes clash, right? So when I ran for office for CYFN, it was really a democratic process, a vote for vote, and it was colonized. And I know I had people that didn't support me politically because they didn't support the fact that women should have a guaranteed seat on CYFN. My sister ran against me. So she was backed by certain people, but she wouldn't say who was backing her campaign. And so that was a detriment.
Who's your sister again?
Nora.
Nora.
Yeah, and that was a detriment to my campaign. But it didn't stop me. You know, it was just like, okay. And then Albert Peter from Mayo won by one vote.
I've seen him on the wall.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. He won by one vote, but he conceded his seat for me. I couldn't believe it. I was just shocked. I was like, you can't do that. You can't do that because I already had, you know, well, I lost, right?
Yeah.
And I could have challenged the count, but I didn't. I didn't want to do that to Albert. We were on the same side as far as I was concerned. So when he chose to not take the seat and let me take the seat, I was just flabbergasted. I was in shock. I didn't even know how to say thank you. I was just like, now what? You know, now what do I do? Kind of thing. Oh yeah, you know. But I did. I followed through with the women. I said I would talk to other women about the guaranteed seat, and I would start with our elders first. And so I started talking to elders from just about every First Nation community. Tlingit elders, Kaska elders. And you know what I learned?
Wow.
They all said the same thing. The women are the boss, and they don't need that guaranteed seat. At some point in time, our young people and our men will realize that. And we just have to remain consistent in our roles and responsibilities and obligations as women. That's the message that I got, right?
Wow.
Not articulated in that fashion, but because you always get a story when you go to elders. They always tell you a story, and it's up to you to find the lesson in that story. And so I went to a number of elders, including my grandmother first. And I was just like, okay, now I got to go back to these women and tell them I can't support that. And this is why. Well, that was my biggest fight in life after that. I lost all my support in leadership, right?
Yeah.
And so when it went to the General Assembly, and I'll never forget that day, and it was at Brooks in Teslin, and so the resolution was introduced, And I think it was introduced by Natranag Dunn. It was probably introduced by Albert Peter. I don't know. I had to vote against it because of what I had learned.
Yeah.
And you know what? That probably was the toughest lesson that I had learned about traditional law, traditional obligations, and women's role. It was tough, and then I also had to learn about my own constitution, of how much I had to be able to stand by what I believed based on what I was told, and my knowledge by my elders and all other elders, that I have to follow in my heart what I believe is right for me and right from what I. That was like almost 100-degree turn. Like, what do you call that? You know, it was just like a complete turnaround. And I know my mentors, the women that supported me going into the campaign, and my mentors, who were women, and some of my best friends, abandoned me. Just were so mad at me, wouldn't talk to me for months.
Yeah.
So that would have been my first year in leadership at CYFN. I was alone in that journey, and it's like, okay, so where am I finding the strength to get through this? It was through really having my grandmother, even though I was supposed to be taking care of her, having her with me every day. That's where the strength came from. It's like being able to reflect things off of her, and then reflect things off of Elijah, and reflect things off of Johnny Johns, and reflect things off of those leaders that were there constantly saying, this is, you're doing
Our
okay.
way.
Yeah, you're doing okay. You're doing okay. Yes, you could go that way because that's the way the majority wants you to go, but you chose to do it this way because this is the way your elders have told you to go. And that's a tough line to walk. That's a really tough line to walk.
I believe it.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that, because this one leads to how I reconcile.
Okay.
How I reconcile that. And it's profound, like that whole reconciliation of myself with my friends and my women's group and my mentors. Oh my God. It's awful.